I don't know how to describe it other than like a demon type of sound.
But it's silhouetted, hulking, every bit of 5.5 feet wide, 13 to 14 foot tall, pitch black.
The one thing that ran through my mind when I had this encounter was I don't have a big enough gun.
Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Creek Devil. We have Mark with us today. So Tom, I'm going to have you take it away since you have spoken with Mark here.
All right, Mark, yeah, you and I chatted a little bit. And by the way, I hope it's okay to say this, and if not, we can, we'll take care of it. But Mark's background, oddly enough, is you have a background in anthropology, correct?
That was my major in college. I never finished on that major. I ended up getting a degree in exercise science instead. But yeah, I come from a family. My mother's an anthropologist, archaeologist, and my plan was to be an archaeologist, and I actually my plan was to study, pre-human history, cavemen essentially, and all the things that led up to us. So it turns out this is a good topic for me.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, arguably, you got into that inadvertently anyway. So anyway, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Okay. Well, I'll set the stage for everybody and let you know, why I was where I was and all that. I'm a stay-at-home father. I retired young in my late 30s. I feel blessed for that. And I have some young children. I have older children too, but I have young children. I have two babies essentially, so I stay home with them. And at the time last year when I had the experience that I'm about to talk about, my wife was in her third trimester, and I was, I already had an 18-month-old, and I was the full-time parent. So every year since 2010, for one reason or another, usually for just, for pleasure, I like to go winter camping alone, solo camping. Not to hunt or anything like that, but I just like to camp in the winter. I don't like bugs. I like the cold. The cold makes me happy. There's something special about camping in the winter. And, last year, my wife, like I said, she was pregnant. I knew that she was going to have the baby in a few months, and this was going to be my last chance probably to do that. I probably was going to have to skip a year of winter camping. So I was feeling the need to get out and get that winter camping in before it got too warm. So, I've been doing it for 10 years, 9 years in a row. So last year, normally I go somewhere a little bit close. I live in Pennsylvania. I live just west of Philadelphia. And normally I go somewhere close to here in Pennsylvania or in New Jersey. I like the Pine Barrens. It's a special wilderness area of New Jersey that a lot of people, if you haven't heard of it, it's a special place. But in any case, I decided, this time I want to go a little bit deeper in the woods. I want to go somewhere far out. And growing up as a boy, my father used to take my brothers and I to north central Pennsylvania when we were kids. And, the place just holds I have a soft spot in my heart for north central Pennsylvania. And it's some real wilderness out there, too. What you have basically is a lot of rolling mountains, East Coast type mountains, Appalachian mountains, with a lot of valleys and a couple small towns kind of dotted in the valleys, and that's it. I mean, you have just a lot of woods as far as the eye can see in all directions. So I said, I got on Google and I found an area that looked real good. It's called the Hammersley Wild Area, and it's a conglomeration of state parks, kind of like, an area where they all sort of meet. And it has the distinction of being the most remote place in all of the state of Pennsylvania, which is saying something. Pennsylvania is a pretty woodsy state, like I was saying. So it's about a 5.5-hour drive. I made the drive, packed everything up, headed out, and I got to a town called Cross Fork, Pennsylvania. It's a town of 30-some people, so it's a real small town. Kind of a stop-through town where snowmobilers cruise through, and 35 people, but it has 2 bars. The town, I noticed that. It does have a motel for fishing season. It has a tremendous creek that goes through it. Kettle Run, it's called. Amazing, beautiful, beautiful, big stream. Goes right through the heart of town, and it goes right into Hammersley, right on the edge of Hammersley. And then, you know, you have some large but smaller than Kettle Run streams that flow down from Hammersley into Kettle Run. And the motel is there for when the fishing season starts, when trout season starts, and I would imagine deer season as well. So it wasn't open yet. I got there, it was March 10th, but I did rent a room in a boarding house next to the hotel or the motel, just more or less so I'd have a place to park my vehicle. I didn't want to leave it on a dirt road in the middle of the woods and then hike miles away from it. So I got there, I rented the room, parked the vehicle, and I didn't waste any time. I threw my pack on. There was about a half-mile walk from the center of Crossfork where I was. You kind of walk on the only road that goes through town, and it you know, you get to the entrance of what I guess they call it a hiking path through Hammersley, but it's really not much of a path. It's just trees with orange and yellow spray paint dots on them, and that way you don't get lost. You follow these dots, but it's pretty tricky terrain for the first half of the walk through the place. We're talking like some, you know, you're climbing up some steep slopes, and there was an area along a couple ridges that are, you basically have, you know, what could be no wider than a 10-inch ledge and sort of a real, like almost a cliff. It's kind of treacherous, you know. You got to watch your footing. So it took a while to get up into the middle of where I was looking to get to. I had everything set into my GPS. I went online and I chose the spot that was, I literally chose the most remote spot in all of Hammersley, in the most remote area of the state. So that was my plan. I was going to get out there. So I don't know, whatever it was. I left at 10:30. It was getting on 4 o'clock, 5.5 hours. I had made it to the top of basically to the point where it was going to be mostly downhill from here. And I sort of stopped at the top of the hill, and I thought, you know, it's going to be dark by the time I get to my spot, but, you know, I'm just going to do it. I'll get down there, I'll get a fire going, I'll turn on some lights and turn on a lantern, and it'll be fine. You know, I hate cutting firewood at night. I like to have it stacked up and ready, but whatever. So I started making my way down. I hadn't gone, 10 minutes downhill, and I hear this tremendously frightening roar far away. It wasn't close by, but it was down in the valley towards where I was heading. So I'm going to say it was at least a mile away, judging by how, you know, you could tell it was pretty far. But it was like nothing I'd ever heard before. It wasn't the best way I can describe it is it sounded like if you took a howl from like a wolf and mixed it with a roar from a lion and a scream from a human, and, you know, amplified it greatly. That was the noise I heard. And, you know, well, Tom, I was talking to you, and I told you that I found a video a few weeks ago. It was called Strange Noises in Northern Ontario, and it's these people out in the woods, and they're recording the exact noise that I heard, just that long, drawn-out, and it would go 5-10 seconds, and then whatever it was, it catch its breath, and then do it again and again. That's exactly what I was hearing. So it stopped me right in my tracks. I mean, stopped me dead in my tracks. I pulled my phone out to record it, and unfortunately, it was too far away. I couldn't pick it up on my phone. But anyway, so it made me stop. I stopped, and I thought, oh boy, yeah, that's literally the direction I'm heading where that noise came from. So I had to make a decision, and I decided, you know what, I'm just going to camp at the top of the mountain tonight, and I'll head down there tomorrow. I didn't want to be down there in the dark with whatever that was. And, you know, you could tell it wasn't a bear. If you've ever heard bears, even, you know, in the zoo or on TV, or I've never heard them in the wild. I've seen 2 bears my whole life. And I've spent a lot of time in the woods compared to most people. And I always laugh when I hear people say, oh, I wasn't a bear, when I hear, you know, encounters. I've seen 1 million bears. I don't know where these people are. They see so many bears. But the only 2 bears I've ever seen, excuse me, was their rear ends as they were running for their life away from me. But it wasn't a bear. It didn't have that kind of kind of noise that a bear makes. It didn't have that noise that you hear from a wild cat. It was something different. Now I know what it was.
Hey, Mark, let me ask you, when you heard that vocalization, was there any sense of it being male or female, or did you get that, speculation?
You know what? That's a good question. Not really. I guess at the time, I wasn't thinking Sasquatch, I wasn't, that thought wasn't on my mind. I was just kind of out in the woods, and I was, to be honest, I was a little confused. I almost thought like, it sounded like almost humanish, but it was obviously not a human. It was too powerful and it was a roar. I mean, it's not, like I said, it sounded like a howl and a lion roaring at the same time and a man screaming all at once. So no, I guess looking back on it, just because it was so loud and powerful, I would get the sense that it was a male, but I don't really know. I don't know if a female can scream like that too or not. I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's not really,
but,
on these things, there really isn't any way to tell the difference with their vocals.
Yeah. I just knew it was big. It sounded big, and it sounded loud and scary. I can tell you that. So yeah, and like I said, it stopped me from my mission at that point. So I set up camp at the top of the mountain, which is, anybody who knows survival knows it's a bad idea to set up at the top of a hill, because you get hit by the weather and the wind, and it can be colder at the top and the bottom of a hill. You sort of want to stay in the middle where the heat the cold hasn't sunk to the bottom and the wind isn't whipping on you. But whatever, I found a good tree that was a huge evergreen type tree with big boughs that were spread out real far, and I cut the lower dead boughs off pretty high, maybe 7-8 feet up, and I pitched the tent under there, figuring it would afford me some relief from the weather. There was supposed to be some kind of precipitation coming that later on that night, so I figured it'd be a good idea. And whenever I set up a camp, I've learned over the years that you always bring an extra tarp. And it's a really good idea to, when you pitch your tent, to surround your whole tent, excuse me, and tuck it under the tent, a tarp. And then I'll take clamps even and clamp it to the poles, because there is no tent on Earth that is truly waterproof that I've ever been in. And it pretty much always rains or snows or something when I go camping. So I set up my tent. I got set up. I got a little fire going. I got a can of Spam out, put it on a stick. I was cooking Spam over the fire, just really feeling real good. It's my first night out. It's been a while. It's been a year since I've been doing it, and I was alone. And I love the silence of the wilderness, and that's the other thing about winter camping. At night, it is just quiet compared to the other times of year. I really like that a lot. I think silence is underrated. It's one of those people. So, especially with my life, I got a lot of children and there's a lot going on. So it started to rain, and it was below freezing there. It was in the 30s, low 30s, and at the time, so it was a freezing rain. It would hit and just freeze immediately on me, on the tent, and I wasn't real happy about that. I tried to keep the fire going, but it was of no use. And then we got a heavy sleet came down right after that. Came down on me. And it was time to retire for the night and get inside. I had forgotten to bring my sleeping pad with me, which was a nightmare because the ground was pretty cold. And I didn't bring my warm weather sleeping bag either. I brought my cold weather sleeping bag. I brought 2 warmer weather sleeping bags and figured I would just leave. I had a couple layers on, winter coat. I figured I would just, leave all my clothes on and get in there. I'd be fine. It was not the case. I was freezing all night. I had a horrible night. Just wind whipping, tons of rain, tons of sleet. I could hear branches coming down. I heard 2 trees crash down. I actually found them the next morning. And one of them was pretty close, less than 100 yards away. Just kind of terrified, to be honest, that I was going to get crushed. But, whatever. I just hung in there and waited for daylight. So eventually the wind died down, and it was just a heavy sleet. And at this first sign of daylight, man, I was out of there. Oh, the other thing is my boots were wet. I forgot to weatherproof my leather boots. I wore my tactical boots. Good dumb idea. And then the five-hour trek up there, 5.5 hours, the snow had slowly leached through and gotten to my socks. So they were totally wet, my boots. So I put them next to the fire the night before to dry them out. And I ended up burning the soles of both of my boots to the point where they were just almost not usable. So now I'm like, I'm tired, I'm cold, I'm miserable. My boots are like ruined. I had to take my emergency blanket and cut it into 2 pieces and wrap my feet in it, and then put my socks on, and then put the boots on to keep my feet. It was just a whole mess. So I said, you know what, that's it. I'm gonna go back into town. I'm gonna take a nap in that room I rented. I'm gonna, grab a beer and a slice of pizza or something, and I'm gonna come back out tomorrow morning. So I left my tent pitched. I grabbed my garbage and all my valuables and all that, and filled my pack, and I left the tent up. I had made sure it was staked down real tight, put some heavy rocks on the corners and on the edges, and I left. I went into town. I had that beer, had a slice of pizza and a burger. I got some sleep that night, and first sign of daylight the next morning, I was out. I headed back into Hammersley, and I was feeling good. I was well rested. I made it up to that same spot in like record time. It was like an hour faster. When I got there, I get to my campsite, and my tent's gone. Tent's just not there. I was pretty confused because I had it pinned down pretty tight, and I got to where the tent was, and there's the tarp. And I don't want to say it was, I say neatly as in like it wasn't like blown by the wind and, up in the trees, or it just had that look like it was removed and just kind of dropped right there. And I use 2 tent stakes on each corner. I use the big ones that they have like the, sort of like a fish hook has. They have, kind of a back serration to them so that they stay in the ground. And then I use metal ones to sort of pin sideways into those. And 3 of those big tent stakes were in a pile next to the tarp. So at this point, I thought someone stole my tent. I can't imagine who would do that, but somebody stole my tent. So I started scanning the area, and I looked off into the woods, and sure enough, there's my tent. And it's sitting straight up like it's been repitched. So now I'm thinking somebody's in my tent right now. There's probably some, homeless guy or something from wild man from the woods is living and sleeping in my tent right now. So I did have a large 357 Magnum with me with some hard cast, Underwood bullets, if you ever know what those are. They're made for bear defense, basically. And I pulled my pistol out and cautiously made my way to the tent. I would say it was about 50, 60 feet back into the woods behind my camp. And the other thing was the tent was in a position, and I'm looking, and there was there was snow. I forgot to mention that. The whole walk up here, I was, going through anywhere from 4 to 8 inches of snow. So as I'm heading to the tent, I noticed that there's tracks leading to the tent. So now I'm thinking there's definitely somebody in my tent. And the tent it's in this small grove of there was like a circle of saplings, and it was in there. Like there's no way wind could have blown it through the saplings and then landed it, sitting straight up. It's just not possible. Somebody had to put it there. And there's tracks leading to it. So I get to the tracks, and I'm looking at them, and I think to myself, my God, there's a giant hobo in my tent. This guy's got to have a size 25 foot. And it just looked like huge. At first, it looked like giant boot prints. And I have pretty big feet, especially, I have the feet of a man who's 6'6". I'm 6'1", but I have a size 13.5 foot. And so I have pretty big boots, and I stepped my foot inside the one track, and it just dwarfs my whole boot. And I got closer. I looked at them. One of them, I noticed, looks like a giant foot. 4 toes, not 5, 4 toes. Big, wide, huge foot. And I sent Tom a couple pictures of the tracks, and the one's a real good print, like a footprint. And it's a picture of my foot inside the print with my 13.5 boots, and it just absolutely dwarfs my boots. It's dwarfing my boot in the picture. So I thought to myself, I mean, is that a Bigfoot? I mean, it's a bare foot in the snow. What else could it possibly be? So now I'm pretty scared. But I did notice, it wasn't a huge stride. It would be like if I took a kind of an overly sized stride. So I got kind of concerned. I got to the tent. I sort of, hey, is anybody in there? And nothing. Opened the tent. It's empty. I looked for like wind marks, because the tent would have left marks on the snow. Nothing. So I started really looking at these tracks, and it would appear that there was 2 different sets of tracks. One gigantic set of tracks, and then one that was big, much bigger than my boots, but not quite as big as the other one. Thinner prints, and the toes were different. On it, you could see there was 2 of those prints where I could actually see toes. I want to just say this: there was prints all over the camp. It turned out, but most of them they weren't real discernible, like a foot. You know what I mean? There was a couple, maybe a total of 3 prints that were actually footprints that I saw, but they were all huge. So I grabbed the tent. The other thing I found weird is, you would have to be 10 feet tall to put, because it was like the tracks sort of just magically stopped in the middle of nowhere. And I can't imagine that the person could have reached over and put the tent where it was without, like, maybe leaning against the big tree that was there and having, like, really long arms. It just seemed weird. The whole situation was weird. So at this point, I'm just kind of walking around going, what the hell? Like, what's going on? I'm finding new tracks, and I thought to myself, oh, yeah, you know what? I left donuts out. I had bought these kind of lousy donuts at a rest stop on the drive up to where I was. And, there's just those classic, like, convenience store donuts that come in a box. They weren't bakery quality donuts by any means, and they weren't real good. And I had a chocolate one and an old-fashioned one left over. I didn't want them, so I left them out on a log kind of near the camp, maybe 30, 40 feet away from the camp, something like that. And I'm like, oh, my God, I left those donuts. So I ran over to the donuts, and sure enough, big tracks leading to the donuts, and they were separate from the tracks that I had left previously when I'd walked out there to put them, because I'd kind of walked out and sort of looked around for a spot and sort of doubled back a little bit to where that log was. And I kicked myself for walking all over those tracks when I got to the donuts. I was just so excited to go and see them. I sort of stomped all over the new tracks that were there. But, yeah, there was a big, real big footprint there as well. And you could tell it had kind of stepped down and sort of pivoted, kind of twisted. And then there was the smaller tracks came right up to it as well. And the donut, the chocolate-covered donut was bit in half and put back on the log. So that just blew my mind, that any animal would take the time to just grab it, to eat half of a free meal like that, half of a donut, and put it back. So yeah, have you guys ever heard anything like that? Like Bigfoot's not liking food?
I can understand that. I can understand not eating them at all.
Well, we had, when we were investing, I always bring up the occult thing because so much happened there, but, that joker that brought all the junk out there brought turnips and donuts and all kinds of things. In that case, the whole box of donuts did disappear. But they took a bite out of one of the turnips, and you could see the big, blocky teeth marks. And apparently it didn't like turnips, so it threw it down, and they went and raided the neighbor's garden.
Nice. Well, yeah, I guess, like I said, they weren't the best donuts. I didn't want them. So, and I always laugh and say that, and it's true, to this day, I won't eat anything from that brand. If it's not good enough for Sasquatch, it's not good enough for me. So anyway, I kind of just walked in circles, and because I really was looking for tracks everywhere at this point. I was a man on a mission, and I began to notice that, it would appear that they were walking, they had, if they wanted to explore certain areas, they had to deviate from my path through the woods. But it would appear, because I had walked the night before all over the place, gathering firewood and stuff like that, it appeared that they had been stepping in my tracks as much as possible. Because you would see, my old, because their stride was bigger to where they would skip one of my feet, you know what I mean, in my tracks. And then you'd see a big squashed print. My print just gets squashed. And I could kind of see where the toes would go underneath the snow, and that they would apparently carefully pick their feet up. I don't know. I found that fascinating. I don't know if maybe was just a coincidence, or, you know, I mean, you guys would know better than me. Do they hide their tracks in any ways like that? Is there anything that have you ever heard of that?
Well, it's certainly possible. I mean, I can't think of any, you know, people who've talked about it, but it's certainly possible they would do that.
That shows a lot of forethought and brain power, you know. So
yeah, they are very intelligent.
Yeah, I mean, do other animals do that you've heard of?
Well, not so much with footprints, but like, excuse me, predatory animals do it with their scat. In other words, you know, you'll have one predator in an area that'll mark its territory with scat, and a larger predator will come along and actually defecate on that animal's scat, sort of saying, now this is my area. So it's kind of along those lines, but not exact.
Well, the prints were everywhere. They were obviously real interested in my camp. And I had left the morning when I left. It was sleeting pretty hard when I left that previous morning and walked back into town. And it sleeted for just 3 or 3.5 hours after I'd left, because I was paying attention to the weather at this point. And I noticed their tracks were filled with sleet. I was filled with a lot of it, you know, 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch or so, which tells me they were probably watching me and waiting for me to leave. That kind of made my stomach drop a little bit. You know what I mean? Oh man, you know, they must have been watching me and just waiting for me to get up and go, and they just couldn't resist. You know, they had to come in and see what this guy was doing here. But I really found it interesting that the tent was moved. It seems almost silly. You know what I mean? But I don't know.
And Mark, you said that it was almost like repitched, right?
I thought it was sitting straight up, just like someone had pitched it. Yes, I mean, it wasn't staked down. The stakes were left where it was pulled up originally. But yeah, it was sitting straight up. I was almost positive I was going to run into somebody in there. You know, like they had moved it like
was
further
this one
away.
Of those? Real quick question: was this one of those tents that, like a dome tent or something, that's sort of self-standing, but you just stake it down to keep it from blowing away? Is that, or was it like a teepee?
A classic. No, it was like a classic dome tent with 2 long poles that crisscross. But it's a one-man tent, so it's not a square at the bottom. It's a rectangle, kind of a smaller one-man style. It's not a big tent.
All right.
But yeah, I found that really fascinating. To this day, it fascinates me. Why would they? You know, you would have to really be pulling on the. You'd have to pull the stakes out. I had a couple rocks on it, you know, on the edges. They'd move the rocks, and then they had no interest in the tarp apparently, but the tent was of interest, and took the time to walk it out into the woods and you know, set it down somewhere. That was. It shows that it shows a level of inquisitiveness, I guess. You know, like they're curious.
One-stop shopping.
I'm just thankful. Yeah, exactly. I'm thankful that they weren't hungry for human that morning, because boy, I was out there. I was far enough. No one would have heard me scream. That's for sure. But so anyway, that I had. You know, I decided that's it. I'm camping. I went down in that valley where I heard that scream, that howling, yelling scream the day before, and I had no incidents for another 3.5 days. Had a great time and camped right next to the stream in there, Bull Run, and you know, hunted crayfish, and I didn't catch any fish. I tried some trout fish and didn't catch anything, and just had a good time. I really enjoyed being out there in the winter. But that whole experience had kind of set me on this path to where we are now. Excuse me. It set me on the path of studying and wanting to know everything I could about the subject. So since then, I have, for a year now, I have spent, and you know, at the time, I was looking at these prints, and you know, it dawned on me, I guess, could this be a Bigfoot? Could this be Sasquatch? I mean, I guess, what else could it be? And I wasn't very educated. You know, all I'd seen is the videos of the fat guys with cameras and lights kind of banging on trees and tromping through the woods. And I just, you know, I just figured, I figured they were, you know, that they were out west. And I've heard about them in Texas and in California and Washington State. And, you know, I did live in Alaska for a little bit. I went to college in Alaska. You heard about them up there. So, you know, that had got me looking into it. And sure enough, there's plenty of sightings in Pennsylvania. In fact, I would say it's a lot of sightings. Not so many in that area. There's a few where I was. Not so many in that area, but there was definitely some. I mean, I know if I was a Sasquatch, that's where I'd be, would be Hammersley. You know, you probably get the least amount of deer hunters in there and the least amount of foot traffic through that area compared to other areas of at least of the state game lands and all that. So for a year now, I've been listening to every podcast I can. I listen to every encounter. I really love your guys' show. You know, I love getting to hear the encounter first and then going through the questions. And this is really a great venue for this whole topic. And, you know, Will, I've heard that you might have put a few hours in studying these things. So
one or two.
Yeah. So anyway, and you know, it dawned on me. Like I said, I have spent more time in the woods. And the real key is that I spent more time at night in the woods than most people. There has been, and in the winter time, you know, in 2014, for instance, I spent over a month in the wilderness of the Pine Barrens. So and it dawned on me as I've been researching Bigfoot and listening to all these encounters that I had a dramatic encounter that at the time just confused me, and I just didn't know what it was and thought maybe it was a bear or maybe a monster, or I didn't know. And you know, it was just a couple months ago, really, it dawned on me, that's right, I had that experience. So this was in 2014. I could tell you the day when it happened, down to the date. It was, I believe, well, maybe not. It was somewhere between December 1st and 3rd in that time frame. It was I believe it was a Friday. But anyway, I was working for a construction company. I was living in New Jersey, right on the edge of the Pine Barrens. Pine Barrens, for those who don't know, it's a wilderness in southern New Jersey. People think of New Jersey, they think of, you know, smokestacks and high rises in New York and thick population. And it is a very populated state, but the southern half of the state it has a 1 million acre wilderness known as the Pine Barrens. And it's a very unique place. It has really poor soil. So really nothing grows there but pine trees as far as trees. You get some scrub oaks and pin oaks and things like that. But it has very acidic soil. So berries grow well there. Cranberries, blueberries. There's a lot of deer, a lot of turkey. There's also, you know, carnivorous plants, believe it or not, on the edges of the marshes and things like that. Really cool place. There's actually plant life that doesn't grow anywhere else. It only grows in the Pine Barrens. Very unique place. You know, I really like it a lot. I've spent a lot of time in the Pine Barrens over the years. So in any case, I was living in a town on the edge of the Pine Barrens. I was working for a construction company. I was living in a house with my ex at the time. Her and I are, to this day, we've always been good friends. You know, it's been a long time since we've been together, but we're still really, really good friends. So her and I were sort of splitting a house. I lived in the upstairs. She lived in the downstairs. We have a son together, so it was good for him to have us both there. And I was driving a company car. I didn't have my own car. I didn't need one. I drove a truck that was the company's, and things were good. And had just opened up a new business, a vape store, with the owner of the construction company I was working for, and we were partners. I basically set up the store and got all the computer systems set up and decorated it and put the furniture together. He provided the building, which was like a strip mall that he had, and it was a good setup. That way, you know, we didn't need a lot of money to get started, and it turned out his wife didn't like me much, and it was on Thanksgiving Day. I'll never forget it. I'd stayed late to set the store up. We weren't open, or we weren't open yet. We were getting set up, and I said, I got to get out of here. He's like, you know, go. I went home to cook and do the Thanksgiving thing, and his wife had told him a few days earlier that if he didn't get rid of me as a partner and make her his partner, that she was going to divorce him. So part of his deal was he was going to get the lawyer together and get all the paperwork and all that. So he had gotten a lawyer, set it up, and just cut me out and signed his wife on in my place. So now I've lost my store. I lost my job because I'm not going to work for him after that. I don't have a car because I was driving the company truck. And I came home and I said to my roommate, I said, look, I don't want to put you out. I know you have other people that could live here. I don't know when I'm going to be able to pay rent next. I'm just going to bail so that I'll put you out. She said, okay, do what you got to do. So I lost everything sort of overnight. It was a dramatic time of my life. I did have two things, though. I had a really good set of camping gear, and I had a girlfriend at the time that still loved me. So I said, at the Pine Barrens, the woods, there was an area called, it's Winslow Wildlife Preserve, I think. It's Winslow, New Jersey is where I was. I was right on the edge of it, the western edge of Winslow Preserve, northwestern edge. The town I was living in at the time that I just left was right there. So I said, I'm just going to walk right back into these woods. They were building a new development next to my development that I was at, and they had sort of they call them sand pits. It's an area where they dump extra dirt that they don't need in case they need it later, for a new house or whatever. So it's kind of just piles of dirt, and people go back there with their dirt bikes and four-wheelers. But mind you, this is December. This is like in the wintertime, so it's cold. So I said, I'm just going to camp it out. And I had friends that were like, oh, come stay with me. I'm like, no, this is how I am. This is what I do. I'm gonna sort of enjoy this. But at the time, I didn't have a car or anything, so it was a little bit rough. So I walked about a quarter mile back in the woods from the neighborhood, and there was a pretty worn path. It was a dirt path that people walked their dogs on and things like that. And I had found a mound right off the path. You look to the left, and maybe 30 yards off the path, there was a big mound, 8 feet high. I pitched the tent on the other side of the mound, covered it with brush, and sort of made it a stealth camp. Figured, I'll sleep in here, and then in the morning I would head out into civilization. My girlfriend would pick me up. I would drop her off at work with her car, and then I would use her car to go find a job, get a car, get myself set up and all that. So that's what we did. And by day 5, I had found a new job. I had found a car, and I'd go to the gym to shower and all that, so I wasn't a dirtball during the day. But my insurance didn't kick in until midnight that night, so I couldn't go pick the new vehicle up until the next day. So it was my last night living, I couldn't have, it was miserable. I couldn't have campfires to keep warm. I was kind of just like hiding out, in this spot. So anyway, every night that I would camp there, every night, a pack of coyotes would come and just raise hell right in front of my tent. I don't know if it was me that drew them there, if it was just their spot, but they didn't really bother with me. They would just yelp and run around and fight and scrap and make all kinds of noise. And the first night or two, it kind of scared me to death. But after that, I realized they weren't messing with me and they were just doing their thing. And then they would be about 8 o'clock. It was like clockwork. 8 o'clock, they'd show up for about a half hour, and they would slowly kind of move themselves away from the area. They would still run in circles and fight and go crazy, but they'd move away as they did it. Take them about 20, 30 minutes to move out of the area before I'd stop hearing them. So the 5th night, I'm laying in my tent. I lay back. I just finished some beef jerky and some food, and I'm feeling pretty good. Tomorrow's going to be a new day. I'll have the new vehicle. I'll be able to get a real campsite somewhere where I can drive in and have big campfires and really, mountain bike and enjoy myself. My job didn't start. My new job didn't start until after New Year's. It was the beginning, about a month or so to kind of just enjoy life out in the woods. So I said, I'm going to make the best of it. So anyway, I lay down. I'm sort of just feeling good, and the coyotes are going crazy, and I'm just starting to close my eyes, and all at once they all start, and they all take off. You can hear them like rip through the woods. And I, caught my attention. That's new. So I sat up. I listened. Silence. All right, whatever. So I lay back down. I'm just starting to close my eyes again, and this stench that is just, you hear about the stench from people that have encounters. I don't know if it's this bad for everybody, but wow. The smell that I can only describe as body odor mixed with skunk, mixed with feces, mixed with real sour, stinky feet. That's the best way I can describe it. And when I say body odor, I don't mean like someone's been at the gym and they've been sweating body odor. I always think back to being in grade school when I used to sit behind this kid that never showered, and he just had this sour smell about him. And it was that kind of body odor mixed with all those other things. I mean, and when I say strong, I mean like, woo, when a smell sort of triggers, it really locks a memory into your brain. And I can remember that moment so clearly, sitting up and, where I was facing in the tent when I sat up and everything. It was just unbelievable. I remember putting my face inside my coat and trying to escape it. It was impossible. There was no escaping it. So I'm thinking to myself, what could that be? Like, there's no way. It smelled a little skunky, but it didn't smell like a skunk. I thought, I guess it has to be a skunk or something out there. So I used to, it's New Jersey, so I'm not allowed to I didn't want to get caught with a firearm out in the woods there. It's a felony. And you can't get a permit to carry in New Jersey, no matter who you are. So all I had with me was kind of a short, straight-bladed short sword that was about 26 inches long. So I unsheathed it, and I said, whatever it is, I'm going to go out there and scare it away, because there's no way I can tolerate this for more than a minute. So I was just starting to unzip the tent when I heard something coming down the dirt path, kind of thump, 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 walking, kind of heavy, not really trying to hide or anything. So I said, oh, man, someone's coming. So I zipped my tent up real quiet, and I just sort of held my breath. I figured, normally I never heard anybody late at night on the path, but I figured, yeah, they're probably just going to walk by, because people do use the path once in a while. So I hear it, it stops. And then and it's obviously a person. You can tell it's a person. 2 feet. It's not galloping. It's walking on 2 feet. Then I hear it stop, sort of behind the mound, and it very cautiously starts to step into the woods behind me. So now my heart just drops into my stomach, and I'm like, oh, like someone knows I'm here. It's probably the cops. I'm probably on private property. I don't really know, but probably. I made it all this time. It's the 5th night, and, I'm going to be out of here in the morning, and sure enough, here comes the cops. They're going to break my balls. It's going to be a homeowner, the police, something. So my heart just sinks, and you can hear them coming through the woods, but it was as if someone was trying to sneak up on something. Like, you could hear them, like, sort of, cautiously putting one foot down, but not real quiet, but quiet enough, stalking through the woods. So I'm thinking, my camp, you could walk up a couple yards from it and not see it, especially at night. So maybe I didn't see any flash. I couldn't see real well because I had a tarp around my tent. I couldn't see anything, but you could see light maybe if there was a flashlight. I didn't notice anything like that, so I thought maybe they won't see me. And then it gets about 20 feet to my left. Figure I'm facing the front of the tent. The mound is behind me, and it's directly to my left, maybe 20 feet, and you wouldn't be able to see the tent from there. It stops. And then it just starts walking, normal speed, crunch, 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 through the woods, right in front of the tent to right where the coyotes were. And it stops. And I hear it breathing, this deep, like a giant monster trying to catch its breath. Best way I can describe it. And I'm thinking, is this like, that is like is there a big, giant, scary man out there? Or is it a bear? What could this possibly be? And as you can imagine, I'm completely terrified at this moment. I don't know if it's a person. I assume it isn't at this point, because I'm starting to put together the smell and the fact that there's a big, heavy breathing going on. And the Sasquatch was the last thing, never even crossed my mind at all that whole night. And then it walks up to my tent, directly up to the front of the tent. I mean, right there. And I'm about to have a heart attack. And it's breathing, and it walks slowly around the tent to the right and stops, right there at the right of the tent. And this is a small tent, so it's, 2 feet, 3 feet at best from me. And I could hear it maybe touch the tent, because you could hear the tarp kind of crinkle. Maybe it pushed its finger on it or touched it. And then it started to sniff. And it wasn't, when you hear a dog sniff or like an animal, they kind of do that like in and out real fast, because their sense of smell is real good, and they don't really need to take deep breaths. But no, it was like if you and I were to sniff something, just like big sniffs, and then letting air out through its mouth. So now I'm thinking it must be a bear, but I don't. There's no bear here. There's been 2 bear sightings in the Pine Barrens in the past 10 years at best. and one of them was in a town kind of a little bit away from the Pine Barrens. So the thought of it being a bear was just, it was either a bear or a monster in my mind. So I thought, is it a person? Is it a bear? And sniffing away. So I got to say something. If it's a person, I got to talk to him. This is what I'm telling myself. I got to say something. If it's a bear and it hears a human voice, 99.99% chance it's going to run for its life. So I'm like, I can feel my pulse pounding in my head. I'm like freaking out. So I just say, I muster up the courage and I go, "Who's there?" And I smacked the side of the tent where the side it was standing on with my backhand, like whap. And to my absolute horror, it doesn't run away. Instead, it lets out the deepest, most terrifying growl I've ever heard in my life. So I mean, talk about like crapping yourself. I was there at that moment. And it sounded like if a dog was to growl, except an 800-pound dog or a 1,000-pound dog. That's the only way I can describe it. And it was a long 5 to 10-second growl. So now I'm just poised with this blade in my hand. I'm just waiting for whatever it is to rip through the tent and kill me on the spot. I figure I'll just go down fighting, with this, and that's it. This is it. And, to my surprise, it just turned around and walked away off into the deep woods. It was on the side when it growled of the deep woods. It just, I suppose, just turned around and headed in that direction. And you could hear it 2 feet, crunch, crunch, not that 4-footed crunch, 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 crunch you hear from something with 4 feet. Just crunch, 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 slowly went away in the distance, went away. So oh my God, I collapsed onto the floor of the tent, like, just couldn't believe. I thought I was dead. So, and I could hear it getting further and further, and eventually I didn't hear it anymore. And mind you, the stench was still there the whole time. And at that point, I was more concerned with my life ending than the stench. And then the stench cleared up. I thought, oh my God, it didn't kill me and it went away, whatever it was. So just when I started to feel better, I heard a crack, snap, like it ripped a branch off a tree or something, loud. And right away I get the adrenaline just surges right back, and you could hear it smack the tree or whatever, smack something else with whatever it just broke loose. And it wasn't like on TV when you see these people like, clunk, clunk, hitting a tree. It smacked the tree so hard that whatever it smacked, I could tell it was a fresh branch that it used, because it would hit the tree and it went, like smack, like it was catching up. It hit so hard that the vibration would smash against the tree again. So at this point, I'm terrified again. And then it let out this, like, I guess like a bark noise, like if somebody sneezed real loud, like a rah kind of noise. Followed by what I can only describe as like a woman screaming, like she just got ripped in half. Or, I guess it would have sounded like when you hear a chimpanzee scream on TV, same sound, just wah! Kind of huge scream. And right, of course, my heart drops into my stomach again, and it's not gone. It's right there. It's probably, 100 yards away, maybe further. I'm not sure. But I just sat there and held my breath for 20 minutes practically, and it apparently went away.
I was just...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just about to ask you, too, like, what happened after that, that experience? I mean, you said 20 minutes it went away?
I guess. I don't know. I mean, after it barked or did the wah noise, and then it screamed, and it was loud, man. Whew. And it's funny because when the coyotes would be at my tent, I was not that far away from other houses. In fact, you could see, if you looked real hard through the woods, you could see the lights of homes off in the distance through the woods. And the dogs would go crazy at people. So you could hear them like, the dogs just off when the coyotes would show up for that half hour. And there was no dogs, man, when this thing screamed. But no, I don't know what happened. Honestly, what happened is eventually I said to myself, if it was going to kill me, it would have killed me. And I swear to God, I had one of the best night's sleep I ever had in my life. Once the adrenaline wore off, I somehow just laid down and went to sleep, and daylight came in the morning, and I packed up and got the hell out of there. And, my girlfriend at the time, she picked me up, and she knew immediately by the look on my face that something was wrong. And, I told her what happened. And I said, I don't know if it was a bear, but it seemed more like a monster. Like a monster was outside. I said, it had to be a bear, a monster. Oh, no, it was just one of those coyotes. I'm like, no. This was not one of those coyotes. Like something scared the coyotes away and then threatened my life, essentially. But yeah, honestly, after that happened, I just went to sleep. I mean, for 20, 30 minutes, I sat there in stone cold silence and didn't move. And then when the adrenaline wore off, I was so tired. I'll never forget how tired I was. And I thought about it. I thought, should I just head in? Should I pack it up and get out of here? Do I even want to get outside the tent? Maybe it didn't kill me. I was in the tent. Maybe I figured, I'm just going to go to sleep. And that's what I did. I went to sleep. But yeah, hair-raising experience. Its face was 2 feet away from mine. It was sniffing the side of my tent. At the time, like I said, Sasquatch never even crossed my mind. I never would ever have dreamed that there would be a Sasquatch in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. It was the last thing I would ever expect. And again, the past year, I've looked it up, and there's been, over the years, a dozen or so sightings, for the past 100 years or whatever. And apparently they're there.
Yeah, I don't really know too much about the Pine Barrens, except I'm a huge fan of The Sopranos, and I'm not sure if you ever watched that show, but there's a whole episode called the Pine Barrens. But yeah, I have looked it up. There are a lot of sightings in that area, and the thing about the Pine Barrens too, it's not just in Pennsylvania, but it kind of goes through New Jersey and everything. So it's a huge area.
Yeah, it's a big belt. It's 1 million acres or more. But in the area where I was, if you pull it up on Winslow Wildlife Preserve on a computer, let's say, and you look at it, that patch of woods I was in is probably no more than 2 square miles. And then you're surrounded by farms and neighborhoods. On the western side, there'd be neighborhoods. And then on the north and south and east would be farms. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was less than a half mile, I'm going to say, from what's called the Old Egg Harbor River. And it's a small river that rolls through that area. And, if you follow that river on Google Earth, there's always a patch of woods around that river. Even when it goes through neighborhoods, when it goes through farm areas, you'll always at least have a couple 100 yards maybe of woods around that river. Mm-hmm. And they must just travel that river and go from, woods patch to forest to forest to forest. And they're all connected. You could even get out into the big patch of woods out there, the Wharton State Forest. It's connected too. You can get to it without having to step into civilization. But there is one spot where I would imagine if they wanted to cross through, they would have to expose themselves a little bit across some railroad tracks. But at night, we all know that, these things could be 10 feet away from you. You never even know they're there. Yeah. So, yeah, I'd imagine
hey, Mark, I got to
slip in it. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Mark, I got a quick question. They got coyotes in the Pine Barrens. Mm-hmm. And I'm just kind of a rhetorical question, but I'm assuming, do they have deer? Do they have other food sources that these creatures might be interested in?
Oh, yeah. There's a plague of turkey in the Pine Barrens. It's real bad. I've never seen, and I've lived all over the country. I lived in the Wasatch Mountains. I lived in Alaska. Man, the Pine Barrens takes the cake for turkey population. Every time you go out there, you'll see them. It's almost that bad.
Okay.
So I would imagine they could be eating turkeys all day. And yes, there's deer. There's plenty of deer. And the coyotes are actually a new thing. When I was a boy, there wasn't coyotes that I remember. They've moved in somehow in the past, 20 years or whatever. But I think that's what it was after. I think it was, it heard the coyotes, it heard them freaking out in front of my tent. It maybe thought they had food, or maybe it wanted to eat them. Because the way it crept into the woods off the path was like it was sneaking because once it realized there was nothing there, it just walked normal. I noticed that difference. It was very apparent to me that it was creeping when it first came off the path into the woods. So yeah, I think it was after the coyotes.
And the coyotes caught wind of it, and then they were like, "He's like,
they
okay,
definitely
the gig is up." Yeah, and the dogs did too. I find that interesting.
Oh yeah. Because like I said, the dogs would go crazy when the coyotes would be out there. You'd hear them the whole time, off, the couple different sets of dogs off in the distance. But yeah, it was dead silent. And that breathing, oh man, when that thing was breathing, I was gonna have a heart attack.
Mark, you bring up such a great point, and let me ask you, Will, this, because we always talk about deer being the main food source for Sasquatch, but do you think that coyotes are also a major source for them for food?
Well, I've mentioned this before. Deer's the obvious one, but they'll eat anything. And we know they go after coyotes because of the association I had with a state trooper back in 1975, and he told me that's what he found, where they were luring him in and killing him and eating him.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, I mean, we all and you hear about how much they dislike dogs in general. At least it seems that way from everything that I've read and heard. That there's some kind of mortal enemy of dogs fear them, and they seem to not like dogs.
Yeah, my dog backed away. Well, he didn't back away. He wouldn't go into the woods. I mean, he apparently knew what was there and took off from there really quick. And I never saw him act like that, prior to that time or afterwards.
Yeah, you know what? It makes me think about something else too. So after that whole situation, I got my Ford Explorer, and I went to a place called Goshen Pond, and it's a campsite. They call it a primitive site. There's no facilities there. You just pitch a tent and you have a fire pit, and that's it. The facilities are a pitcher pump when you want water, but it's on the Mullica River, and it's kind of spreads out into a lake right there, sort of a marshy lake. And I often wonder about this too. I was having a big roaring fire. I was all happy and excited because I could finally have fires and just raise hell by myself. And of course the coyotes would surround that camp every night too. And I was the only one at Goshen Pond the whole time. And I kept hearing shotguns off in the distance at night. There was some good old boys. You could tell they were out there. You could hear the trucks revving up and shotguns. And so I had a whistle. And every 15 minutes or so, I would whistle real loud to let them know not to shoot in this direction. And, they had finally gone away. I stopped hearing the gunshots. I heard the trucks drive off. But I blew the whistle anyway just to make sure they knew I was there because it was pretty quiet. It'd be a good time to blow it. And I blew the whistle, and something whistled off in the woods right near my camp. And it would have had to have been less than 100 yards away. Either like somebody in a canoe in the lake or somebody right on the edge of the lake, the direction it came from. And it sounded like a person whistling, not like another whistle whistling. And, my blood ran cold for a second. And I said, "Who's there?" I screamed. Nothing. I didn't get any answers. I'm like, "Yo, who's there?" Nothing. So I ran in the woods real quick with a flashlight. I figured it was someone in a boat. That was my number. No, there was nothing there. I saw nothing. And I often wonder if that was one too, maybe. Because I would have been the only source of entertainment for anything out there. It was dead of winter. There was no other campers. There was, I would imagine I would have been at least a curiosity for something like that. But yeah, I often think of that.
I'm gonna jump in.
That was a week later.
Actually, I was going to make a comment.
I'm going to jump in for a second. I was going to ask Will to comment on that because I know you got something to say.
Yeah, I was just going to comment. When we look at Native American ceremonial masks, you see the masks that have the pursed lips, and that is the Bukwas or the Sonakwa. That's their what their words for, and I can't remember which tribe at the moment, but and there are other names, for the wild man, and the whistling and the pursed lips is whistling. That's what Native folks talked about these things doing. Way before we heard of anything about any other kind of vocalizations.
Well, somebody whistled, and I often wonder if it was, a person. It sounded kind of loud to be a person. That's what scared me.
It could have been
I figured it
one
was
of
a
these.
person.
Could have been one of these because they do whistle.
Wow, that would be, boy, that's a serious run of Sasquatch encounters for me. I didn't even realize if it was, because that was no more than a few days after the last experience I told you about. And I remember I went on Facebook Live when it happened, and I remember I still had the video, and I said, "There's somebody out in the woods around my camp," and I actually took the phone into the woods with me when I went, totally expecting to find a person in case someone killed me. You know what I mean? In the middle of nowhere in the woods.
Some record of it.
So there'd be a record of it. But yeah, so it's that. But that one that came up to my tent, when it stopped, 15, 20 yards in front of the tent directly, because it was thick woods, thick brush, and then an open area in front of the tent, sort of in that area, 15, 20 yards ahead, where the coyotes would run around. Man, it was right there. And when it stopped and did that breathing, oh man, I swear I almost had a heart attack. I was so terrified. And then I walked up to the tent. I couldn't believe what was happening at the moment. But yeah, I chalked it up as a bear. So I looked it up, this past year, and there's no way it was a bear. Black bears, number one, they're all but non-existent in the Pine Barrens. And number two, they don't smell. They don't have a strong odor. People say, bears are smelly. It turns out, and I looked this up on some real zoology type websites. No, even when they're hibernating and they'll urinate a little bit on themselves, it's not even a strong smell, from what I understand. So it definitely wasn't a bear. It wasn't a coyote. I can't imagine what else it could have been.
Mark, let me ask you, do you think that since it didn't, necessarily attack you, do you think it was just trying to send you a warning to just get the heck out of the area?
Judging from where I was, I can't imagine that it was feeling super territorial. I was on the edge of civilization. Like, you could see lights of houses, and it was a 5-minute walk to the neighborhood, to the center of the neighborhood. So I think maybe it was just blustering. I think it was curious. It obviously showed up to look for food, because it was coyotes. Whether it was trying to get them or their food, I'm not sure. And then I don't think it noticed my tent until it had got to that clearing. This tent was, and I can't, people say, they could have smelled you. There is no way, if you smell that bad, you can smell anything but that halo of stink around. I don't care how good your sense of smell is. It was crazy. It was the nastiest, it was the most vicious stink I've ever smelled.
Oh, I've smelled it. I understand, yeah.
And it was like, it was making me dizzy. It was that bad. I remember thinking,
you can't pin it on just one odor you can compare it to. There's nothing to compare it to.
No, you can. The only thing I compare it to, like I said, feces, smelly feet was a good component.
Yeah.
Yeah, smelly feet, BO, feces, and there was a skunky quality to it. I do remember thinking maybe it is a skunk, because there was a little bit of skunk in there too, but there's no way that thing could have smelled me. You'd have to be, there's no way. But it did try, and I remember, that was obviously one of the scariest moments when it started to sniff the tent, because mind you, like, if I didn't move, its head was near my head when it was sniffing. But how could it even smell me?
That's
kind of, smells that bad.
That's kind of reminiscent, though, of you guys recall the Larry Batson story about Bob Titmus from a few years before Patterson got his film in that same area, where he covered himself up and decided to spend the night instead of trying to bumble through the woods. Yeah. And the creature came and was sniffing the air. He could hear it. He apparently was aware that he was there, but couldn't find him.
But he was actually buried.
Yeah, he covered himself up in a shallow hole.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, I think that's what happened. I think it came in to get the coyotes, and then it noticed my tent and said,
burrito.
Maybe there's food in there. I guess it just it must have got a little, because it doesn't know how many people are in the tent,
Right.
Maybe I have a gun, maybe I don't. So I'm assuming it just was too afraid to take the chance.
Probably that close
at
to
getting at me, but
that close to where people are living. Sure.
yeah.
Going to be very
So
cautious
I don't
there.
think it was territorial. To answer your question, I think it yelled and screamed because it was probably a little bit angry, but it was definitely sending me a message when it snapped the branch off.
Mm-hmm.
And you knew exactly what it was. As soon as I heard, I knew it snapped the branch off, and it beat a tree or something else with the branch, and then it barked and screamed. It was definitely basically saying like "F you" to me.
Yeah,
Is what it
it
felt
was
like.
a display, sure.
Yeah, but yeah, it's some terrifying stuff. Oh man! And if you look around that patch of woods, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to go back to the sniffing for a moment, and I was going to ask Will. They really don't have their number one sensory is not smell, but it's sight.
It's going to be eyesight and then hearing, just like us.
Yeah.
Sense of smell is going to be down
and
the
like
list
I
of
said,
ways.
Yeah, and like I said, there's no way you could smell anything other than your own stink if you smelled that bad. I can't imagine that you'd be able to smell anything, but
See,
what do I know?
Now, typically, they don't smell like that all the time, so that could have been a reaction to your presence.
Right, because, Will, haven't you said before, too, that it's kind of, just like with other primates, it's a kind of it comes out of their armpit.
Well,
and
out of glands, right.
Yeah, and it's mostly from anxiety.
It's from anxiety, They get excited or angry. They can emit that odor because we find with the majority of reports, vast majority, and I know from my own encounter, very close up, that I didn't smell anything. So, but I have smelled that odor before in a place, and it's very likely due to some kind of anxiety or stress.
Right.
Well, I wonder. I don't think it would have. Here's the thing: is that I smelled the first indicator at all was the smell. So, and I heard it finally after I smelled it walking down the dirt path. So I'm assuming it was kind of far away. I don't know, 40 yards away when I first hit me.
Yeah.
When the stench hit me.
It was probably agitated that you were there. It probably knew you were there.
And
yeah, I guess so.
And Will, of course, I think from your first experience, they probably didn't know that you were there, so that's why you didn't detect any odor, because they probably were just surprised that you were there.
Well, that all happened very quickly. So I mean, because I ran out of the house and with my dog, and it could have been too that they weren't that concerned with me. It's not like they're all, it's not cookie cutter situations where they're all going to react the same way.
Right, because you were just a young kid at that time. So
that was 16, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's got to be a harrowing experience for a 16-year-old.
It was an underwear-changing moment, let me tell you.
Yeah. Believe me, I feel you on that one. And, the patch of woods I was in, if you look around it, it would be a really good spot. That's a question I have for you guys. How much wilderness do you think a group of Sasquatch needs to just, how much territory? Because, I mean, we're not talking, the wilderness of Pennsylvania or upstate California. This is like maybe a square mile, 2 square miles of woods, and then, farms, and then another patch of woods. I mean, how much do they need? I guess not much. They're
not going to just live in one place. They move frequently. About every 2 weeks, they move through areas. Okay. So now the ones in the East Coast are a little different than the ones out here. So they probably need less area, but they're still going to be on the move. I mean, it's very similar to how gorillas move. So, they move to avoid predators, us, and typically it's so it doesn't really deplete their food supplies, so they move all the time. But as in terms of amount of area, the area that I worked for a dozen years in southern Washington covered around 3,300 square miles, and one group, circulated through that area.
Yeah, we're talking a lot less than that. Where I'm, for that area of the Pine Barrens, but that also means that there would be bottlenecked areas where they would have to cross through.
Correct.
To avoid. So, there's opportunity maybe to catch a video or something of one. If you could do it right, because they would have to go through these areas. You can you could go right now on Google and look at the Pine Barrens and look at all the patches of woods, and there's definitely areas, because the spot where I was when that thing came by, there's one way in. I mean, you're either crossing a farm field out in the open, or you're sticking in that skinny little spot where the river goes through in between those two neighborhoods. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's opportunity. And you know what? I contacted the BFRO, and I talked to the guy about it, and there just seemed like a total lack of enthusiasm. And I said, look, I'll take you to the very spot where it happened, and they didn't really get back to me about it, and I don't know. I found that interesting too. Like that's.
Well, we won't go down that road, but we understand.
Yeah.
Listen, fellas.
Mark, I'm looking at the area here, and I can see that well, I was just going to mention, there are some choke points in there. It is pretty fascinating. So I suspect Delaware and maybe get some of these, but you can certainly see Pennsylvania. Very fascinating.
Yeah, and they could be
all of your encounters.
As far as part of a range, they could be coming out of Pennsylvania and into that area, sort of a peripheral. For
what would they do? I mean, it's a big river. Would they swim across the Delaware?
Sure. They swim the Columbia River all the time.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I couldn't believe it once I realized. The last thing that night was the last thing that crossed my mind was Sasquatch. But yeah, I mean, it would appear that these things are everywhere. Wherever you got a decent patch of woods.
Pretty much, yeah.
I guess you'll find one eventually crossing through.
Well, listen, fellas, we're running a little short of time. Mark, stay in touch with us, and we can help you information-wise. So.
Yeah, that would be great. And I want to thank you guys for everything you do with this. It's it's not often I can just talk about this and get it off my chest. I know it sounds silly, but it's the same old story for me as you hear for everyone else, where I get a lot of eye rolls, and it's nice to have people that are willing to listen and answer my questions. I appreciate it.
It does make a difference, and like I say, we'll definitely help you out. Answer questions and anything you want to know, we'll do our best to help you with that.
And we do definitely appreciate you too for coming on. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Well, I appreciate it, guys. I appreciate it. I'm going to. I do plan on, when I get some free time in the next few years, heading out and really exploring that area actually, and. If I have any questions, you guys will be the ones I go to.
Awesome. Mark, I got to say, really enjoyed having you on the show tonight. Very interesting.
Absolutely.
Sure. Multiple encounters. Yeah, very good ones.
Well, I appreciate it. Like I said, it feels good to talk about it. And, you guys have questions for me too. Let me know if you're ever out this way and you want to know where to go. I can show you the exact spot.
Absolutely. We may take you up on that.
All right, cool.
In Bigfoot history, near Stewart, British Columbia, mid-August 1968. About dusk, 4,000 feet up an old road, two hunters saw a creature covered with short, dark hair run off erect up a hillside. I talked to one of them on the phone. He said it was more than 7 feet tall and very heavily built, with a short neck, a flat nose, long arms, and wide shoulders.
Story from Orleans, California, 1952. This person's encounter was so shocking that he blocked it from consciousness for a time. He did recall the events, however, and this is what he related. I began to remember more and more of what happened. I had me a bad case of the jitters as the memory uncoiled. The first part of the story took me back to 1952, when I had gone to Orleans to start preliminary work on a logging operation with two men by the names of Lee Valeri and Josh Russell. One evening, Josh told me Lee had gone up to Happy Camp, but not having transportation back, wanted me to take the Mercury and go up and get him. I had driven the extremely crooked and dangerous road up there, but not being able to find him, started back alone to Orleans. It had been raining very heavily, and after going back a few miles, I found there had been a slide across the road. There was a man with a flashlight there who told me I could still go back to Orleans by way of a detour across the river. He said it was a dirt road that went through Bear Valley and could come out at the mouth of Bluff Creek a few miles below Orleans. I had been driving slowly down this road for about 20 miles, I guess, sort of daydreaming, when I saw it. Dimly in the headlights, and the rain, was a shaggy orangutan-like apparition of a human. For an instant, I had the impression the shaggy hair of the creature was a hoary blue-gray in the headlights. An ogre, I remember thinking. But the thing swiftly backpedaled off the road and behind a tree. I automatically passed it off as imagination and drove on by the spot. Suddenly, without warning, the car went into a violent and unreasonable skid. I brought the car back under control, but for some reason glanced into the rearview mirror. In the dim light of the taillights and license display bulb, I thought I could see a savage-looking face looking through the rear glass. I continued on, and when I looked again, there was no face. So again concluded it was imagination. I had gone another quarter-mile, I guess, when across the road was a small 6-inch sapling. I stopped the car and got out, intending to drag it aside if possible. Suddenly I heard the swift thud of flying feet of something coming down the road. Reality was upon me, and I remember cursing myself for not paying attention to what I had previously seen. It was the shaggy human-like monster I had seen in the headlights. It at once started circling around me, snarling and acting very menacing. It kept this circling up for some time and once came up quite close, and I could see its face reflected by the headlights much better. The eyes were round and rather luminous. The hair on top of its rather low and rounded head was pretty short. Its eye teeth were far longer than a human's. Also the chest and upper part of its torso was rather bare of hair and also leathery looking. It wasn't too tall, not much more than my own 5 feet 9 inches, although it had a stooped, long-armed posture. Then suddenly it changed tactics. It would stalk off down the road, but would come charging back, like a bat out of hell, when I started toward the car. The hour was late. The thing was becoming more and more menacing, and I was almost paralyzed by this time, paralyzed by fear. Suddenly a plan of escape, born out of desperation, popped into my mind. Since the monster seemed to think I couldn't get away, why not, when it went down the road again, playing cat and mouse, try to get in the car and smash through the sapling? This I did and sprang for the door of the car a dozen feet away. No sooner was I inside when there it was, trying to claw through the window. I jerked the car into gear, floored the accelerator, and can vividly remember the wet sapling glistening whitely in the headlights as the car slashed it aside. I remember the scream of rage and frustration it then gave. It was a curious, trumpeting sound, like the scream of a stallion and the roar of a mad grizzly. The car then felt as though it were being held back by something half riding and attempting to stop it. But the powerful mercury proved too much for it, and after a couple 100 yards I felt no more resistance. To top this unbelievable experience off, believe it or not, I promptly forgot the whole experience. Then and there it went out of my mind. Not even the next day, when Lee asked me if I had seen anything unusual on that road last night, did I remember. He had come later from Happy Camp with another man hired to take him to Orleans. A few days later, an incident happened that should have brought the experience back, but didn't. Lee noticed a big dent in the grill of the car, and asked me how it got there. I told him I didn't know. Incidentally, Lee told me that something had tried to push them off the road when they came through on the detour. He said there's something strange going on around here, and let the matter drop. Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open out there.